You're listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast. Welcome back to another episode. This month we are talking to the Iowa Supreme Court's newest justice, Justice Matthew McDermott, to hear about his memories of growing up in Carroll, Iowa, his journey to law school in California, and how he is managing his first year on the bench amidst a global pandemic. Keep listening. Thank you for being with us today, Justice McDermott. As the newest member of the Supreme Court, our listeners might not be as well acquainted with you yet. Can you tell us a little bit about your life and growing up in Carroll?
Sure. Well, it's good to be with you here. I was born and raised in Carroll, Iowa, which is about 100 or so miles northwest of Des Moines. I'm the sixth of seven kids in my family. My dad was a feed salesman, so he sold feed livestock farmers. And my mom worked as a clerk in a local store there, and she played the organ at church. I went to Kemper, was the high school that I went to. There are two high schools there. I was involved in a lot of stuff, kind of a lot of the normal things, sports and plays. I did a lot of speech and debate in high school also, and it was that kind of got me thinking, I think, down the law path ultimately. But it was a great place to grow up. Most of my brothers and sisters still live in Carroll County. My mom still lives there. My dad passed away quite a while ago, but we give back a fair amount, and obviously being as close as we are to Carroll, I'm still very close with all my siblings there.
And I'm sure being one of seven helped with all of your debate skills.
It did, yeah, it did. There were a lot of debates in our house, of course. Thinking back on it now, the neighborhood that I lived in was full of kids, and so the kind of idyllic upbringing that you might think of with a very lively neighborhood with a lot going on was certainly one that as I reminisce about it was one that I had growing up.
You went to college at University of Iowa for undergraduate and then sought your law degree from the University of California, Berkeley. What influenced you to attend law school in the state most well known for its very vigorous, some might even say brutal, bar exam?
Well, when I was growing up, most of our vacations were ones that we drove to, and we primarily went to Okoboji for vacations, and we still do. We still love Okoboji, of course, but I didn't do a whole lot of traveling, and so it wasn't until I was in college that I actually went on my first commercial airline flight, and between my junior and senior year of college, I interned in D.C. for Senator Grassley's office. And that was the first time that I'd ever spent really any time outside of Iowa in any kind of meaningful way anyway. And so when I was applying to law schools, I had this, what I sort of refer to as the George Bailey itch, to get out of Bedford Falls for at least some period of time, and applied primarily on the coasts for law school. And Berkeley actually paid for a flight for me to come visit. And I knew pretty quickly that that's where I wanted to be. I'd never really spent a whole lot of time in California, of course, at that point. I didn't know anybody there, but wanted that adventure at that time. And Berkeley was a great place for me. I made a lot of friends that I'm still very, very close with. I lived in a house with 8 other people there, and so we continue to meet, usually once a year, and we text a lot, of course. And so It was a great place for me. I worked in New York City between my second and third year of law school and liked that a lot, but ultimately decided that I wanted to practice law in Iowa, that I wanted to come home. Of course, Des Moines is very different than Carroll. I never lived here,
Right.
but I moved to Des Moines and then practice here.
Like you said, you were a practicing attorney for many years before your appointment. So what types of cases did you work on?
So I worked at a law firm in Des Moines for 17 years. I focused my practice on litigation matters, and I was very fortunate as part of my practice to work on a really diverse array of cases and legal matters. And so I handled civil cases, I handled criminal cases, I handled administrative cases. So kind of the whole gamut I was able to get involved in. And, the clients that I represented were everything from, international businesses to mom and pop shops in Iowa. And so, my morning might be devoted to, a $1 billion contract dispute, and my afternoon might be, involved in a misdemeanor criminal case. And I've handled everything from small claims cases all the way up to Supreme Court cases. And so the diversity of my practice was something that I really, really liked. And I think something, frankly, that's kind of helped me transition into this job.
Was there anything such as the diversity of your cases or anything else that really surprised you about working as an attorney, or that you came to love about practicing law?
I would say my favorite thing about practicing law was being a problem solver for my clients. And it was a very high honor to have someone come to you to ask you to help them solve their problem. And I took that very seriously, and it was something that I personally derived a lot of satisfaction from. There's this great line that Lincoln apparently said to Billy Herndon, his law partner. After he had been elected president, he was apparently on his way out of Springfield. And he said, Billy, when I get done with this, I'm going to come back and we're going to keep practicing law just like we have been. And of course, Lincoln was the last president who went from practicing law, from representing people in court, to the White House. That hasn't happened since. There's always been a different path since then. You've been in my office. You've seen my office. I have Lincoln,
Mm-hmm.
photographs and paintings and books. That recognition that representing an individual person in court to help them solve their problems is, I think, one of the highest honors, one of the highest achievements that a lawyer in this field can ascribe to. And so it was great practicing law. I really enjoyed it. But I'm tremendously enjoying what I do now also.
Right. And now that you are on the bench and having in the past argued before this very same bench as an attorney, how do you reflect on that time now that you are a justice that you used to argue to?
It's interesting being on the other side of it now. I think having been, at that podium and been on the other side of the bench for as long as I was, has given me an insight, frankly, into some of the challenges that lawyers have in their practice. I think it's good to have that background. I think the lawyers that come before us, by and large, are very good. They work very hard. I think Iowa has a great bar with a lot of top-notch lawyers, and I've seen lawyers from all over from my practice. There's a line from that Chief Justice Roberts made when he was going through his nomination process. And he said, whenever I would come to the Supreme Court, whenever I would walk up those steps, I'd get a lump in my throat, and I don't think it was just from the nerves. And I found that to be completely true, that whenever I was coming here to argue for a case, or for any reason, frankly, there's this kind of lump in your throat that you get coming to the Iowa Supreme Court. And I feel that still, the same feeling that I had when I was coming here as an advocate, I get every time I pull my car into the garage here, just this honor that, we all have to be part of this system. And now, of course, I have, a different role, but I still feel that honor and still sort of feel that sense of awe, as odd as that might sound.
You mentioned to the Des Moines Register after your appointment that it was a dream come true. Had you always had your sights set on a judicial position when you went into law?
When I decided to go to law school, I think at that point I didn't have a very firm grasp of it. I knew that I liked doing speech and debate. I knew that I liked reading, I liked researching, I liked writing. And those things all sort of seemed to align with a career in law. It wasn't until I started practicing that I started thinking about the possibility of becoming a judge or a justice. The job as a lawyer, as an advocate for parties, is to analyze cases and advocate for your client. In doing that, you're constantly thinking about what a judge, what a judge might be thinking about the arguments that you are making. And so you're frequently putting yourself in the shoes of the judge. And I think that it's sort of natural at that point to start thinking, well, it might be really interesting to be on the other side of it and to get to wrestle with some of these issues from a completely different angle. And I was really drawn to that once I started practicing.
So how would you then describe your transition from being an advocate for one side and one party in a case to now being in those exact shoes and having to hear both sides of that argument?
I think the core function of what I did before and what I do now, at its core, is really similar, because you're analyzing cases, you're researching cases, you're digging into facts, and you're trying to apply the law to those facts. And you do that as an advocate, and you do that as a judge. The difference is, of course, that when you're an advocate for a client, you're sort of limited to the side that you can take, and you're sort of pushing what you have to push. As a judge, or now as a justice, you're obviously not limited by that. You have one client. That client is the law, and that's it. And so it's a different client, but I think that the core function of it is really similar. Digging into facts, analyzing law, applying the law to those facts.
What are some aspects about being a judge that have surprised you and seem obvious to you now that you're in the position, but you didn't really think of prior to your appointment?
It's a good question. I think the quantity of reading. I mean, of course, I knew that as a justice there would be a lot of reading, obviously, that you'd have to do because you're clearly reading briefs. But in every single case, and this court will take on, say approximately 120 cases every term. In each of those cases, you have multiple briefs typically that you're reading in each one, but then you have a record beyond it. You have a transcript that you're digging into. And so, it's not uncommon that, in a typical case, you're having to read through, hundreds and hundreds of pages of transcripts and briefs and exhibits and things like that. And so the quantity of time that I have to spend just reading and thinking is quite a bit. The other thing that has somewhat surprised me, I guess, is because our court has a deflection system where every case comes to the Supreme Court first, and then can be directed to the Court of Appeals, it means that we have to read and think about what cases we want to take on, and there's a fair amount of time that goes into that process too.
It is no surprise that your experience so far has been unique, as you were appointed to the bench in April of 2020 in the midst of the ongoing pandemic. So not only are you adjusting to the work of a justice, but also heading up committees tackling issues brought up by COVID-19. Can you tell us a bit about how you're balancing both those new administrative responsibilities and your adjudicatory work?
Yeah, it's certainly been a curious time to join this court. Obviously, the pandemic was underway at the time that I got the call from the governor. And the court trials, both bench trials and civil trials, were shut down when I started. In my regular, practice, before I came to this job, I was involved in, a lot of different aspects of the practice, not only from, a representing clients side, but also involved in a lot of nonprofit boards, legal aid, things like that, where I was sort of applying legal skills to other avenues. In this role, there is the Supreme Court sort of serves as a board of directors to the entire judicial branch. And when I came on, I was assigned to co-chair what was called the Jumpstart Jury Trials Task Force, because again, at that time, at the time that I came on in April, jury trials had been stopped, and so we were tasked with trying to figure out, first of all, when we should come back, at least advising this court as to when we should restart jury trials based upon the science of what the numbers were looking like and when it would be safe, but also what protocols we should put in place to try to make sure that people are safe that are being part of this jury trial process. And there's a lot to think about in doing that. Obviously, on the one hand, you're trying to balance the constitutional rights that people have to have swift jury trial, swift justice, but also recognizing that when you have a jury, a jury trial, your members of your jury are not always coming because they want to be there voluntarily. They're being called to jury service, and so you want to make sure that that parties have fair trials, that they're having their justice delivered in a timely fashion, while at the same time recognizing that you have to provide for all of the safety of the participants there. And that task force was obviously a lot of work in trying to make sure that we were able to make that happen. We were able to restart jury trials for a period of time this fall, and we had a number of jury trials successfully go off. I don't know, maybe a couple dozen, or maybe a few dozen, I guess, by the time that we had to call them off again in November. But in that time, at least we're not aware of any incidents of spread of the virus from any jury trials. We were able to provide for distancing and all of the other safety protocols that are kind of typical now.
Lastly, if there is one message you'd like our listeners to take away from this interview about Iowa courts, what would it be?
I have been uniformly impressed with the diligence and work ethic of everyone involved in the judicial side of this process. District courts work very, very hard. They have a high volume of cases that they're working on. Appellate courts obviously see some of the thorniest issues that flow from those cases. And this pandemic has obviously placed a significant stress on our judicial system and on everyone involved in it, just as it has in basically every facet of society. And so I think, in the time that I've been here, I've seen people working incredibly hard under very difficult circumstances to deliver a critical public service to the people of Iowa. And I'm very proud and very honored to have been part of that for the last whatever it's been, 7 or 8 months. And I'm really looking forward to once we get past this pandemic to working through our backlog and to delivering justice to the people of Iowa as this court has for 150 years or more now.
Right. Thank you again for being with us today, Justice McDermott.
Thank you.
You've been listening to In the Balance, an Iowa Judicial Branch podcast hosted and produced by me, Marissa Gaal. If you would like more information about Iowa's courts, you can visit www.iowacourts.gov. You can also follow the Iowa Judicial Branch on Twitter and YouTube @Iowa Courts. This episode of In the Balance is now adjourned. Until next time.